experience that I'm having right here in this world. And admittedly, I was also thinking the same thing. And I think we'll be diving into kind of more of the spiritual aspect of it and what it has to do with our lives and how is it relevant. A little bit about Kavi Karnapura. He grew up in South Africa. He's been studying Vedic astrology since 2002, and he has also done a small stint as a monk for 14 years. Small. just kidding. But he's beloved by, and this is actually a prelude to a seminar he's giving here, I think next weekend, on the 18th, right? On the 18th, he'll be giving a seminar about astrology and some more topics about that. So without further ado, let's give a big round of applause to Kavi Karnapura.
So thank you so much for joining us. I have to ask though, does anyone feel a little bit uncomfortable about this topic, of astrology and how it relates to spiritual life? If you come from a Christian background, perhaps a more fundamentalist Christian background like me, then you do grow up with some warnings about things like astrology. And I think even in the Bhakti tradition, we are striving to become mystics in a certain sense, become deeply absorbed in the transcendental name and form of Krishna. So why then a concern with something like astrology? Is it perhaps not a kind of distraction? Has anyone come across that? Any of that? Like no one at all.
Yeah, I've heard it a lot. A lot of people will say this in the...
Yeah.
But I don't believe it.
Yes. It's true. It has. Oh yes.
I've heard people won't date each other because of I don't know, maybe it's Western astrology. It's like, oh my God, you're a Cancer, I can't date you, or something like that. Things like that.
All right. Yes. Okay. So there's certainly truth to that to some extent, but if you're just going by sun signs, you're missing out on a lot of details, and you can actually get around suns being somewhat incompatible as long as the moons resonate with one another, then everything should be fine. But yeah, and this came about quite spontaneously. The last few days I've been reading a wonderful text, Sri Vishnu Sahasranama. You may be familiar with this, the 1,000 names of Lord Vishnu. And I was so surprised that the first name of Vishnu. So this, just to give you a bit of background, this is a text from the Mahabharata, or section from the Mahabharata, wherein King Yudhishthira asks Bhishma, grandfather Bhishma, about who is the one to worship, the one Lord, and that sets the stage for these 1,000 names to be spoken. And what struck me is that the first name of the Vishnu Sahasranama, the first name of Vishnu, is Vishva. Vishva. So anyone familiar with this Sanskrit word Vishva? Yes.
Oh, but I think it means universe or world.
Yes, exactly. And you may think that's a little impersonal in a certain sense, Vishva. But Vishva and Vishnu actually have the same Sanskrit verbal root, vish, to pervade. So the idea is that the Supreme Spirit, the Supreme Lord, Brahman, enters within everything and enters within this universe. So the universe is a form of transcendence in a certain sense. The universe itself is a divine form, and if you're familiar with the second canto of the Bhagavatam, you'll know about these chapters that deal with Vishvarupa Yoga. That's how Srila Prabhupada terms those sections that deal with connecting to God through the universe, through our lived experience. And this understanding is very important when it comes to really appreciating how Vedic astrology is relevant to our spiritual lives, because it is something like a grammar of everything. And I don't want to give away the punchline now, but we'll probably touch on it at some point about how exactly this contributes to our Krishna consciousness. I had someone raise his hand there.
Yeah, you said it's like a grandma or a grammar?
A grammar,
Okay.
yes, yeah. So a set of principles, you could say, to interpret this language that is unfolding all around us. There's this understanding, of course, in the Vedic tradition and in the classical Christian tradition as well, that in the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was God. So there is this language underlying reality. So to get a sense of that. But I want to look at even more ways that we interact as serious spiritual practitioners with the realm of the stars. Think, for example, of the mantras we chant when applying tilak. So these names are names of Vishnu that are the names of Surya Narayan, the form of Vishnu as the sun god, who rule the 12 months of the Vedic year. So in one sense, and I've done a lot of research about this, where this comes from, but it invokes the protection of the Sudarshana chakra, these names that we use to apply tilak. So we're connecting with this realm all of the time. Think about how Krishna himself frames the knowledge he's giving to Arjuna, the knowledge of the soul. Who does he say he spoke this to in the past, before he spoke it to Arjuna?
The sun god.
Yeah, the sun god, Vivasvan. Yes. Think about what happens whenever an avatar appears. That somehow or other you'll find an astrologer there who in some ways gives credibility to the avatar. So we know when Sri Krishna appears, we have Gargamuni who makes his appearance. And Gargamuni is in fact a sage who wrote extensively on astronomy and Vedic astrology. When Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appears, we have Nilambara Chakravarti, yet another astrologer who makes his appearance and confirms the divinity of this avatar. When the Buddha appears, we have the sage Asita who appears, and he divines that this will be a very important person who will change the future course of the universe. So I find that very interesting. Even within the Christian tradition, who do we have who come by not long after baby Jesus makes his appearance?
Three wise men?
Yes, the so-called magoi. So magoi, the Greek term coming from magus, where we also get the term like a sorcerer from, but this would be a Persian astrologer, so an astrologer coming from Persia. So I find that very interesting, that astrology has in many ways always been connected to spiritual lineages and even to some degree the power of kings. That motif, I'm sure you're familiar with the king and his sorcerer, his wizard. King Arthur had Merlin, yes. Queen Elizabeth had John Dee, a very fascinating character that you definitely want to check out, a very accomplished astrologer. So yeah, I just wanted to put that out there, and maybe then even more specifically when it comes to the Bhagavatam. The Bhagavatam itself, and this is quite obvious, seems to have a strong astrological understanding in its background. We have 12 cantos, and those 12 cantos seem to have a correlation to the 12 houses we find in Eastern and Western astrology. So the first house would tell us a little bit about a person's trajectory, and this is of course where we meet Krishna first. But then we have the second house, the third house, the fourth house is down below, is in one sense the earthiest house of the chart. At the time of birth, the fourth house would be that 30 degrees of space directly below you at the time of birth. Fourth canto deals with King Prithu, this incarnation of the Lord that ruled the earth and became this exemplary monarch. Then we get to the fifth canto with a lot of astronomical and astrological lore built into it. Anyone has read or worked their way through that fifth canto? Definitely well worth checking out. Then we get to the sixth canto, and what do we find in the sixth canto that's kind of what it's known for? Ajamil, yes. And some other adventures there in the
Vritrasura.
What's that?
Vritrasura.
Yeah. So there's some major challenges there. Just like the sixth house is a house of challenges. There's more to it. I don't want to go too dark here, but yeah, I think Ajamil already is a pretty intense and very sixth house affair. Seventh canto, eighth canto, ninth canto, and then we get to the 10th canto. So the 10th house in astrology would be that area of space directly above you at the time of birth. And if at the time of your birth there are significant planets there, or luminaries, they will have a profound effect on the course of your life. They're very influential. It's the most visible part of the chart. It shows your status, your influence on the world, and this is of course then where we find the pastimes of Krishna and Vrindavan. So it's almost like someone who knew something about astrology used this scheme in a very poetic way to emphasize the position of Krishna. There's a lot more to this, and I won't delve too much deeper into this at this time, but essentially when I teach Vedic astrology, I have found that Parashara Muni, so that this would be the father of Srila Vyasadeva, that his account of how the different planets relate to different avatars of Vishnu is a wonderful way to really understand the energies of the different planets and to understand them spiritually and how they are working in our own lives and charts. So you can understand everything about Mars, everything, by studying Lord Narasimhadev. You can understand everything about the Sun by studying Lord Ramachandra. You can understand everything about Rahu by studying the pastimes of Lord Varahadev. You can understand everything about Ketu by understanding Matsya Avatar. So, long story short, you don't have to deviate from pure Krishna Bhakti when studying Vedic astrology or astrology in general. And it can actually enhance your appreciation and understanding of that Supreme Personality. Okay, so without further ado, what we'll be getting into this evening is just a little bit about the ancient science and art of not only Vedic astrology, but astrology in general and its effect, the kind of effect it has had on human development. And then, of course, we'll focus in on the eye of the Vedas. The eye of the Vedas would be the Vedic term for astrology. So the idea is that Veda, or knowledge, has eyes, and those eyes are astrology. Then that, of course, raises the question, does the Veda Purusha, does the Vedas personify, does knowledge personified have any other limbs? Well, yes. Veda Purusha also has ears. That would be the Nirukta. The Nirukta Shastra deals with etymology, the meaning of words, of Sanskrit words. So the oldest dictionary in any language would be Yashka's Nirukta. And the Veda Purusha also has a nose, and the nose deals with shiksha, the correct pronunciation of the Sanskrit mantras of the Veda. The Veda Purusha also has a mouth, and that mouth is Vyakarna, is Vedic grammar, the grammar of the Sanskrit language. He has his arms, that would be Kalpa Shastra, all about ritual, how rituals are conducted, and his feet would be Chanda Shastra, Sanskrit poetics, how meters are chanted. And I'm sure you have come across Sanskrit meters that are chanted in meter, and you've maybe also come across shlokas that you've wanted to chant and you didn't quite get the meter and it just doesn't want to work. So when it works, when it all clicks, it's like that verse has feet and it can take you places. So the Veda Purusha is multifaceted. Part 2 is what we'll get to on Saturday, and that will be very hands-on. If you're keen for part 2, you will have to get in touch with me and send me your birth details, and we'll get very hands-on with your chart and just explore it a little bit together and go a little bit deeper than what we can manage today. We'll be paying special attention to the sun, moon and ascendant. Most of us are familiar with our sun sign, isn't it? That's kind of pop astrology, but think about it. The sun spends around 30 days in one sign, whereas the moon spends about 2 days in one sign. So your moon sign is way more specific than your sun sign, and the ascendant changes every 2 hours. So that's even more specific. So that triangulation between the ascendant, the moon sign, and the sun sign, that really gives us a sense of a person. On the physical plane, that would be the so-called Stula Sharira, that's the ascendant, the external self, whereas the moon sign tells us about the inner persona, that is the personality, the heart mind that sounds through the physical body. And the sun sign tells us about the Karana Sharira, that would be the causal body, where this whole psychic machinery gets its energy from.
You asked at the beginning about like hesitations.
Yes.
For me with astrology, I've always been reluctant because I think it could lead to overthinking. Like knowing too much could lead to overthinking. Could you maybe talk about some of the benefits of like diving into like your own chart, what to make of what you learned, that information?
Brilliant, yes. So absolutely, I would even suggest at times, although it's rarely followed, the suggestion that I've recommended that certain people stay away from astrology, because I've seen how, and not to be biased against any particular placement, but if you've got a moon in Scorpio, I'm just saying. There tends to be, something of a bit of, over concern, or like a obsessiveness, you could say. And it can be a little bit unhealthy, and also fears, all sorts of fears. 'Cause I have a very good friend with exactly that kind of placement, and she got into Vedic astrology, and she was like 2 weeks into it, and I was getting these messages, oh my god, my grandma is going to pass away, what am I going to do, you know, and then 2 weeks later, oh my god, my mother is going to pass away, what am I going to do? It's just like, oh, this is exactly what we want to avoid in a certain sense, and there's truth to that adage that a little knowledge can be a dangerous thing. And the problem with astrology, and maybe even more so Vedic astrology, is that it's such a vast field that for a very long time you will only have a little. Not to discourage anyone, but it will take a time before, some significant time before you feel you have more than a little knowledge. And in that interim, you certainly need some kind of spiritual practice to balance out your study. And you may even want to be careful about how you approach your own chart. Of course, we want to know, and it's a form of self-realization to delve into our own charts. Why not? We have to live and work with this psychophysical machinery, and the better we understand it, the more effectively we can use it, even in our devotional service, absolutely. But then again, becoming so caught up in the workings of one's own mind and one's own life it's a little bit narcissistic too. so that has to be balanced. And you may want to also take a look at other charts, and maybe specifically the charts of spiritually evolved entities. For example, there's a tradition of framing the birth chart of Lord Ramachandra in the place where you will be studying Vedic astrology. And this is still done in parts of India. Not just the chart of Lord Ramachandra, but also other great personalities. In fact, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, they have these Sipaho charts that are the charts of great acharyas that they worship like deities. So I have a suspicion that something like that also existed in the Vedic tradition, and that's where it came from. So that can of course be very enlightening to study the chart of Sri Krishna. We also have the chart of Radharani, and it's actually very interesting to consider the compatibility astrology between the divine couple. It's very interesting. And it sheds a great deal of light on many, many pastimes. Srimati Radharani has a moon in Scorpio. All right. Yeah, so what you can learn from studying your own chart, and I would say that would be a healthy way to work with it, is to get a sense of the modes. In one sense, my take on Vedic astrology is that it's an extension of the knowledge of Sankhya, the knowledge of the workings specifically of the three modes of material nature, because it gives us a qualitative understanding of time, of the Kala Shakti and how it unfolds, and how we in one sense are locked into time. And from the perspective of various Indic traditions, time itself has been regarded as the supreme deity. It comes through in the Purusha Shukta prayers, comes through again in the first verse of the Vishnu Sahasra Nama. There's that famous line, I think they quote it in Oppenheimer, I haven't seen it, but apparently he did quote some Bhagavad Gita, and specifically that line where Krishna reveals that he is all destroying time. So, in one sense, one can approach one's relationship to time through astrology, and it can help one make the most of one's time, and understanding the qualities we have, and maybe even more specifically seeing the divine potential in the qualities we've brought with us into this life. A very important part of the chart that has become crucial almost to every reading I've been doing over the last few years would be the placement of the so-called Rahu-Ketu axis. This gives us a sense of a person's past life abhiman, their past life self-concept. Not necessarily, I'm not one of those, well, I haven't been able to learn those techniques or to practice the kinds of mystical sadhana that allows you to see what a person did in a past life. But at least using relatively mainstream techniques of Vedic astrology, one can get a sense of a person's self-concept that they cultivated in past lives. Like, how did they think about themselves? Did they think of themselves? Did they really identify with their mind and emotions, with their family? Did they really identify with their career, or did they identify with diseases and problems of their physical body? So you can get that sense, because whatever we identify with comes at a tremendous price, and we find that out as we grow older, especially towards our 50s. We have to start moving towards Rahu, its placement in the chart, and move away from Ketu. Ketu kind of shows us where we've planted the flag in recent past lives. In fact, Ketu literally translates into English as meaning flag. So it's that south node is where you've planted that self-identity. And then Rahu, using the scheme that Parashara Muni gives us, connected to Varahadev, Varahadev dives into the ocean of cosmic devastation and retrieves Mother Bhumi and installs the plane of sacrifice, Karma Bhumi, the place where we perform our karma. So if you want to know where your task lies, where your work lies, where your sacrifice lies in this life, then that would be the placement of Rahu. So that again is very, very, very useful to know. In fact, I would love everyone to be familiar with at least that placement, because we can very easily fixate on that past life abhiman and just repeat the same drama again and again, because it's so natural. It's where our flag is planted. It's what we're used to doing. It's so easy for us, and sometimes it's something wonderful, like being a monk. And it may not be the thing that really pushes forward one's spiritual development. You have another question?
Would you say that the goal of spiritual practices is to move yourself away from where you started, and that the goal of astrology is to understand where you started?
To some extent, I think the goal of astrology, as the eye of the Vedas, can shed light on the whole path, not just where you started, but where you're going in the interim. It's actually a beautiful verse from the Brihad Samhita by the great Vaishnava astrologer Varamahira, where he says that even a renunciate who has renounced all worldliness and lives in the forest, even a renunciate wants to talk to an astrologer to know what's happening. And so, and we saw that with even highly evolved devotees like Srila Prabhupada, that at times he did check in with the astrologers just to know what's happening, especially at times of great challenge. Where is it coming from? And maybe how to respond intelligently. to what is developing. One way to see the hand of the Lord, you could say. Yeah. All right. Oh, yes.
Sorry, I have a quick question. So, from based on what you said, like because I have my moon and my Rahu and my Venus conjunct between the cusp of Libra and Scorpio, so it's a very obsessive and very deep, from what I understand. But my bigger question was like, can you through spirituality change your planetary or like change the direction in which you were kind of supposed to go in, because that kind of conjunction can be very obsessive, but it can also be detrimental in a lot of ways.
Great question. This is wonderful. All right, yeah. So, of course, the kind of question that does come up at some point when one becomes involved with any kind of astrology and you become familiar with your chart is this going to be some kind of a sentence? There certainly have been astrologers like that, and there are many that you'll come across that hold that opinion that it is very much set. But to begin with, you can look at the kind of sign. There are these three kinds of signs. There are fixed signs, there are cardinal signs, and there are mutable signs. And fixed signs, of course, are a little bit more fixed. And planetary influences centered in those signs don't easily shift. But when you're dealing with cardinal signs, when you're dealing with so-called mutable signs, then generally it's easier to shift those influences. And then how to shift them? I would argue that the very act of reading your chart is already a process of shifting that karma, because you're becoming aware of it. I once had a client who, after a reading, got back to me and said that I just saved them like 6 years of therapy, or it feels like they got 6 years of therapy from one astrology reading, because in discussing what's happening inside, day after day or month after month, your therapist will gradually form a picture of what's happening inside. But you can get that from the get-go. If you get a good reading, you can get a sense of how you're wired to some extent, and knowing how you're wired. To quote the Buddha, Manapu Bhangama Dhamma Manosetta Manomaya, that whatever phenomena we see in this world, it's preceded by the mind, that it starts in how we think about things. So what we see manifested in the chart started as a way of thinking. Patanjali uses the term vritti, a turning, that the mind is nothing but vritti. It's these turnings. So we're creatures of habit, but so many of those habits play out unconsciously. So to some extent you can also learn what you can learn from your chart by practicing something like mindfulness meditation, by becoming very observant of what's happening within. So this is a roundabout way to answer your question. Yes, especially if you can develop a feel for how certain placements are constructed energetically. Then you can get a feel for how your mentality, how your thinking, feeling and willing contributed to this kind of vasana, this knot. Vasana is the term used in the psychology of yoga for a karmic complex, samskaras, a whole knot of samskaras. It's a vasana, so you can get insight like how to untie this vasana if you understand how it was tied in the first place. Then of course that brings us to the realm of upayas, and if you come in contact with Vedic astrology, or if you're from India, someone at some stage would have definitely tried to sell you an upaya, for sure, like a ring or a havan, like a fire sacrifice, or a something, a marriage to a tree. You know about the marriage to the tree? If you have bad marriage karma, if your first marriage is doomed to fail, then they get a priest to perform a marriage to a tree, and then that karma is done. Sometimes you can get married to a pot, and then yes, they dress up the pot in a sari if that's your persuasion, and then they drown the pot in the Yamuna. That's how they do it in Vrindavan. Like
There's a
afterwards.
famous actress, Aishwarya Rai, she did that. She got married to a tree, and now her second marriage is, she got married to a big actor, and she has a kid already.
Excellent. There you go. It works. There you go. So yeah, I'm definitely not going to make light of these traditional bias. They can certainly work. I also find, however, that in the West we sometimes, because we're just more mental, I guess, we need to understand a little bit more about what's happening and how this all works. So when it comes to certain placements, I feel some counseling maybe around the energetics of that placement, and some understanding, some realization about how you created that kind of vasana, that karmic complex, is sometimes more valuable than simply the ritual. But if you can have both, that can sometimes be very, very good too. So yeah, you can definitely change, but then there are certain things that you can't change. Like, for example, if you're born without a hand, you can't really change that in this life. Not by changing your thinking so much. You have a certain handicap and it's there. So yeah, there certainly are limitations, but Vedic astrology does help us enter, I would say, a more subtle understanding of things, because that's ultimately where life happens. It doesn't happen on the physical plane, and it especially doesn't happen on the physical plane for those who are more mentally awake. There's that beautiful verse in the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, what is night for all beings is the time of awakening for the self-realized. Yeah, so what is night? This darkness of material existence, where if you're simply relying on your material senses, you're only getting a fraction of what's really unfolding. We know that life really happens inside the mind and the heart. Okay, so we're moving a little slowly, but that's all good. Bit of background about some significant engagements with the astral sciences from different parts of the world. Napta Playa, this is in southern Egypt. It's a fascinating archaeological site, just the fact that it's still there and that it's still accessible. But this is something like a little Stonehenge, and in fact it's even more complex than Stonehenge. So this is a type of Vedic observatory, or at least observatory. To say it's Vedic is maybe a little bit too generous. But nonetheless, it's clear that there was advanced interest in the movements of the planets from a very early age. We have then, of course, also Stonehenge, which is very clearly a calendar. And the Nebra sky disk, a fascinating artifact found not far from Leipzig in what is today Germany. So this again is actually a calendar, that disc that you see there, and that cluster of 6 or so smaller discs are actually the Pleiades, or Kritika, the Kritika constellation. Yeah, that is a calendar that you're looking at. Of course, it will take a little bit of training to be able to use it to determine time, but nonetheless, a fully functioning calendar. We also have these fascinating star charts from the Babylonian tradition, the Mul Apin, from around 1000 before the Common Era, and in this account we already find all the major stars named, the major constellations. So there was a very developed tradition of observing the skies and also making predictions based on heavenly phenomena. And then of course also this Antikythera mechanism that I always feel I need to promote awareness of this. I wonder if we have sound on this.
When we first looked at the results, it was astonishing. We've had to rethink the history of technology completely as a result of this single object. It's such a clever, extraordinary, sophisticated machine, completely shocking for ancient Greece.
120 years ago, sponge divers discovered a shipwreck off the tiny island of Antikythera in Greece. And what they found changed our understanding of human history forever. Among the treasure trove were marble statues, elegant vases, glistening jewellery and ancient coins, and what looked to be a hunk of corroded metal that no one knew quite what to do with.
It was not recognised at all as being anything interesting when it was discovered. It was just a corroded lump about the size of a large dictionary.
But when, in 1902, it was discovered that there were gear wheels inside it, everyone suddenly got rather excited.
This was the first shock because anything from ancient Greece simply shouldn't have gear wheels. These were precision gears with teeth about 1 millimetre long. And this was just completely shocking.
And the Antikythera mechanism has captured the imagination of archaeologists, mathematicians and scientists ever since.
It's a dedicated calculating machine, and it uses bronze gear wheels to calculate the cycles of the cosmos being the sun, the moon, the planets, against the stars. And wind it forward 10 years, and you can know where the sun and the moon is going to be and where the planets are going to be.
The question of why the ancient Greeks created such a device has plagued experts since its discovery.
I think it was conceived as a calculating machine that would calculate the theories they had. They had astronomical theories, but could calculate those at the turn of a handle. So it would demonstrate how you could look ahead, say, what's the position of the moon going to be in 5 years' time? You could turn the handle. They'd tell you almost immediately. This is a massive step forward in the history of science and technology. Something we take for granted now, but in those days, the idea that your scientific theories could be mechanized, the predictions could be mechanized, was absolutely astonishing.
Now kept in a museum in Greece, the 2,000-year-old device is split into 82 fragments, and much of it is missing. But in the years since this discovery, modern technology has vastly advanced what we know about the mechanism. In the 1970s, a team X-rayed the device, and the first secrets were revealed, dozens of cogs hidden within it. But it wasn't until 3D X-ray technology came along that they could separate these gears out.
We took an 8-ton X-ray machine to Athens, installed it in the museum, and we took X-ray data of all the 82 surviving fragments of the mechanism. And when we first looked at the results, it was astonishing because it showed us not only all the gear wheels in 3 dimensions so we could separate them, but it showed us all these new inscriptions in the fragments as well.
A new world of secrets was revealed, a user guide, hidden within the folds of corroded bronze.
This was a wonderful revelation. Out of that data has come nearly all the breakthroughs in recent decades. Came the discovery that it predicted eclipses, that it followed the variable motion of the moon.
Previous experts had been able to model the back of the mechanism up until this point, but these inscriptions helped Tony and his colleagues with their latest model, which focuses on the front of the device.
There's thousands of text characters in ancient Greek which tell us how it worked. It displayed the ancient Greek cosmos, the sun, moon and planets, in a sort of ring system. It brought back the history of technology to a much earlier time. It is completely astonishing that the ancient Greeks firstly had the conception of making this technology and secondly the ability to actually physically make it. We've had to rethink the history of technology completely as a result of this.
Right, yeah, so that's a quick introduction to this device. It's significant for a number of reasons. One would be that the arrival of Greek mathematics in northern India with Alexander the Great really caused a stir in the world of Vedic astrology, and a whole genre of texts such as the so-called Yavana Jataka came about, and you'll find that the Vedic Brahmanas write that although the Greeks are Yavanas and they're uncivilized in many ways, because they're awesome because of their mathematics and their systematic observation of the sky, and therefore we honor them. So it's sometimes nice to see how these bridges existed between worlds. But it also shows that the most sophisticated technology of the ancient world was used in conjunction with the astral sciences. We find that ancient China also had a very sophisticated observatory that was hidden from everyone, really, because there was this fear that if the public could understand this science and particularly get their hands on the chart of the emperor, then that would spell political disaster for the empire, which is very different to the Western approach, because in the West, you find these Roman emperors, they would actually get their birth charts painted within their palace walls. Like, you have the sun there, have Jupiter there, have the different gods depicting their birth chart to give them credibility, and sometimes they would adjust things a little bit, like a more powerful ascendant or an exalted Mars there, or just soup it up a bit. And the Mughals, although they were for the most part Islamic, had a very deep reverence for astrology and Vedic astrology at that. And there are instances of Mughal rulers who went completely, I would say even overboard when it comes to astrology. This one ruler insisted that everyone in court would dress according to the color of the planet on the day. Like, so in gold on Sunday, on Mondays in white, Tuesdays in red. He insisted on that. So yeah, it's interesting what great effect what status the astral sciences had in the ancient world. We already touched on the 3 wise men, but there is this understanding of this duality, and it goes really deep. This is one point that we could spend a whole evening on. Earth and sky, Father Sky and Mother Earth. Dhyau Prithvi, in the language of the Rig Veda, this divine couple that in many ways prefigure or suggest Prakriti and Purusha. So many layers to this understanding, and then of course in the traditions of Mesopotamia, even more so, these deities, Anu and Ki. Anu, the Sky Father, Ki, Mother Earth, and the so-called Anunnaki, their offspring, the equivalent of the Devatas, were of course very influential. Royal lineages all over the world, even in Africa, very often trace their origins to the sky, to either the solar or the lunar lineages. We find that motif, of course, also in the Indian classics. We have Lord Krishna, who of course belongs to yes, the lunar dynasty, and then we've got Lord Ramachandra that belongs to the solar dynasty. So we have these great kings and their descendants. Some of them are still around. The descendants of Lord Ramachandra, and in other parts of the world too, these lineages can be traced to the sky. So there was just this understanding that wisdom, even our forefathers, came from the skies. And I'm not going to go to the ancient aliens realm with that, but yeah, this is just according to our relatively mainstream interpretation of the classic traditions, both East and West. The Theogony, a very important ancient Greek text, is so similar to a Purana when it describes Father Sky, Uranus, and Mother Earth, Gaia. It's uncanny. And it's really astrology then that, and this is where it again is a very powerful tool. It becomes, like we mentioned, something of a grammar for this shared ancient knowledge, this Sophia Perennis. So that's a term that could be translated, maybe with a little bit of liberty, into Sanskrit as Sanatana Dharma, knowledge that is always relevant, ancient knowledge that is always significant. And you'll always find astrological symbolism and imagery play a big role in these esoteric traditions. Well, we even find it there in the Leelas of Radha and Krishna. Parashara Muni connects Sri Krishna to the moon, and if you know a little bit about astrology, both Eastern or Western, you'll know that moon is exalted in which sign?
Taurus.
Yes. As for Darwin, isn't it? Place of the cows, and he's Gopal. Taurus is also where Krishna's moon is, according to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. So, yeah, it's very interesting that these motifs exist over such a wide variety of ancient knowledge fields, and then, of course, even our own language. The languages that we speak today, like English, we still have many words that look back to this ancient knowledge. We speak about martial arts related to Mars. We speak about lunatics that are somehow affected by the moon to some extent. You can be jovial. So Jove is an old name for Jupiter. So if you're jovial, you're Jupiterian. You're happy-go-lucky. If you have a sunny personality, everyone knows what that means. If you are Saturnian, what does that mean?
Serious.
Yeah, very serious. Yes. So we still have those artifacts in our language too. A few physical artifacts. this from a synagogue, where we have this chariot of the sun in the middle. Very interesting, considering the iconography associated with Surya Dev on one hand, but then also the iconography of the sun god in the Nordic traditions, and it kind of points again to this Sophia Perennis, that there are these shared roots that connect our different pasts. This manuscript is beautiful. Here you have what in Sanskrit texts would be called the Kala Purusha, and it's this form of time depicted as a human, or having human form, and this understanding is used extensively when it comes to medical astrology. So you have Aries, of course, related to the head, Taurus to the neck and mouth, Gemini to the hands and shoulders, all the way down to Pisces that relate to the feet. But you'll find that in the standard Vedic astrology text, the Kala Purusha, the form of the Purusha as time, is depicted in a similar way. Another beautiful illustration of the Kala Purusha. Oh, and I have to mention the Picatrix. On one hand, the name is so beautiful. On the other hand, it is a really interesting text. If you do want to get deeper into astrology, do get yourself a copy of the Picatrix. It's not that difficult these days. But it's an Arabic text that was translated into Latin eventually, and it became the cornerstone of Western alchemy, Western, I guess, for lack of a better term, astral magic. But a lot of the ideas coming through the Arabic lines of influence actually come from India, because the ancient Arabs were very interested in astrology, just like any up-and-coming empire was, and they actually collected a great deal of knowledge that's no longer available, actually, because the libraries have been burned. So sometimes you can find really interesting things in the classic Arabic text, and the irony is more of them are available than the classic Sanskrit texts that are high quality. Scholarly editions of the Vedic astrology texts are simply not available. You may find, I think there's maybe one, and it's a very minor text in the history of the tradition that's available. So a lot of work to be done there. I guess we don't want to spend too much time on the artifacts, although you can see I can clearly get lost in it.
I have a question about your point about the destruction of the ancient knowledge.
Yes.
Because in the Vedas, it's believed that they didn't give all this knowledge to everyone. It was only for the Brahmins, because they were very cognizant of the fact that it should be used in a proper manner. And we are seeing the example of it, that today all this nuclear power and all, you can destroy the world with the same knowledge that you can create. We can't create, but we can destroy. So do you think that, just your point of view, do you think that the universe did it for a particular reason, so that not everyone should be given this knowledge, freely, or they shouldn't attain this because it's higher knowledge and you can misuse it unless you're spiritual and you know how to use it properly?
Well, I mean, yeah, there are many reasons for what has been termed in certain circles as a ethnic knowledge apocalypse. So not just Vedic knowledge that disappeared, but also traditional sciences from the Americas. South America had some really interesting things happening there, but in terms of destruction, they suffered even more. Their codexes and manuscripts were burned en masse. We have even less of their knowledge available today. There are these accounts from Arabic historians about their campaigns in northern India, where they would come to fortresses and they would very easily take these fortresses, and then they find out the only thing inside would be books, and then they would burn it. And actually then they, if you look into what really happened, it was actually a library or a university that they burned down. So many, like Takshila was burned and Nalanda was burned. We lost, we once at our Vidyapitham in Govardhan, where I spent some time, we were studying Sanskrit there, and we did a very conservative calculation, but it seems like we lost about 90% of the Vedas, of the Vedic literatures. 90%. I mean, we're fortunate that what we have is the cream and the mature fruit and all of those wonderful things, but we lost a great deal. So part of that is undoubtedly due to the nature of the age, that we're dealing with Kali Yuga. And this age just doesn't really facilitate finer human pursuits. Case in point, feel this. This is gross power, like tunneling through earth for the sake of economic development. You would never find that in the ancient world. Like, if anything was going to be constructed, it would be for a religious purpose, for bringing people closer to God. Like, so all the ancient structures that we find, they're temples. You won't find a power station or an apartment building even that's preserved from the ancient world. If anything is preserved, if anything was ever built on monumental scale, it was something with a spiritual purpose. Our values have changed. There simply isn't that much room these days for these things. It could get you into trouble for hundreds of years. Some of these books, like the Picatrix, like, I just get some joy out of just saying the name and talking about it, because for some centuries, if you were caught with that book, you would be burnt. Now you can buy it, you can download it, you can read it, you can practice it, no problem. Because it's no longer even seen as dangerous. There's so little regard for it that now it's just, not even relevant. At least in the eyes of materialistic culture. So yeah, what to do? But we have to preserve what we have. And studying something like Vedic astrology certainly isn't just an exercise in memorizing facts. There really is an opportunity to develop certain faculties, a finer understanding of one's own mind and psyche and how we relate to the world. There's really a lot of benefit in it. It's not going to make you money. I'm reminded of that quite often. But yeah, it certainly will enrich your life, and it will give you a very special understanding of these texts, of these older texts, especially the Vedic text and the Vedic culture, because this knowledge was very important to our ancestors. Whether our ancestors happened to live in India or in the Americas or in Africa, the knowledge of the skies, the knowledge of the stars were held in great reverence. Even our Rupa Goswami, and I should have memorized this verse by now, I had it memorized at one point, but he opens the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu with this beautiful verse where Krishna is described as Akila Rasamrita Murti, the very form of concentrated aesthetic experience. Difficult to unpack that term in English language. And then he mentions Taraka, Vishaka. He mentions constellations that are also gopis, and you can read this verse as an understanding of the Akila Rasamrita Murti as being the moon or as Sri Krishna. So this understanding would always be there in the minds of the acharyas. They're always to some degree tapped into this. Sripad Ramanuja Acharya wrote a book on the houses used in Vedic astrology. I think it's the Bhava Artha Deepika. I may be wrong, but he certainly did write a book on the topic. So, yeah. Maybe then, because I think our time is gradually coming to an end. But I just wanted to touch on these, on the scope of classical astrology. So this would be Vedic astrology, but also classic Western astrology, Hellenistic astrology. Of course, we're all familiar with birth charts, natal astrology, the Janma, Pataka. There is synastry astrology, compatibility astrology, when we match different charts. And by matching a whole chart, you get maybe a more holistic picture of the interaction of two individuals. Simply going by sun sign would give you, I would say, less than 10% of the picture. So you can counter those claims. If anyone wants to reject you just for being a Cancer or a Taurus, you haven't heard where my moon is placed. Horary astrology, or prashna in Sanskrit, is one of my favorite forms of astrology because it gives such accurate answers. This is when you ask a question. You ask a question at a specific time with some reverence. There are some determining factors. You don't want to be in a vehicle. You want to be reasonably suchi, reasonably clean, and reasonably calm when asking the question. But you ask a question, and that time is used to draw up a chart, the position of the planets at that moment. And that gives us a sense of how a situation will develop over time. And this can be a question related to anything. What would be the result of suing X? What would be the result of investing $100,000 in platinum? And you get your answer. Solar return charts, or Varshapala charts, they give us a sense of how a year will develop. And again, maybe more accurate than just working with the birth chart, because the birth chart is quite general. So to get a sense of something happening at a specific time in the year, you would want to take a look at the year chart. And it's drawn up at the very moment the sun reaches the point it occupied at the time of your birth. So every year the sun will return, therefore the term solar return chart. And although the sun will be in that position roughly every year, everything else, the ascendant and the position of all the other planets, will likely have moved. And that sheds a great deal of light on the coming year. Electional astrology, or Muhurta astrology, deals with choosing an optimal time. So if you have to do something important, we find that very often that when acharyas would start the writing of an important text, that they would very carefully choose the time, and then somehow or other they also manage to finish a work on an auspicious time, and that's also typically indicated. You may find this in some Sanskrit texts. But really any undertaking, if it's a major life move, changing ashrams, if it involves starting a business, all of these things can be enhanced by choosing a time that is in harmony with that undertaking. And this was quite intuitive to our ancestors. They would know, East and West, what the position of the moon holds at a particular time. Sometimes it's not a good time to plant or to invade the neighboring kingdom. It would be pretty obvious. Sometimes it's a very good idea. And then, of course, so-called mundane astrology deals with world events and political intrigue. Things like wars and famines and pandemics. All of these things can also be assessed astrologically. So I think I'm going to stop here for now, and then we can see if there are any questions. I don't know exactly how much time we have left, Matanga. One question. We've got time for one question. And then on Saturday, we can get into not so much, well, we may touch a little bit on all of this, a little bit of this, and this, and then eventually we'll get to the main part. So yeah, working with the sun, moon, and ascendant in the individual birth chart. Okay, so we've got time for one question. Yes.
Did you mention before that you came from more of like a Christian background or something like that?
Yes.
My question is, how was it that you felt astrology was something worth pursuing? I know I came from a similar background, and some people have the experience of either it was something that you learned a little bit and it was proven right to you and then you decided to learn more, or was it something that, were you skeptical about it before, or were you already showing an interest towards it, just wondering what your experience was?
All right, well, yeah, I definitely showed an interest in this, and it got me into a lot of trouble. A great deal of trouble, in fact, as you can imagine. And I had to change schools at some point. It was really bad. We had the satanic panic in South Africa in the 90s. You had it in the 80s. So I was lucky enough to ride that wave. And so it wasn't something I could really get into openly, but I did find a very good book on Chinese astrology in the local library, and that kind of set me on the path of a more intricate understanding of astrology. And then, of course, when I came in contact with Vedic astrology, with the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition and the Srimad Bhagavatam, then I learned about Vedic astrology, and everything else that was Vedic seemed so rich and deep. I thought that certainly Vedic astrology must be rich and deep, and yeah.
I mean, it definitely almost feels like we were given very little to learn from, but at least we had the planet. It's almost like a guide, I think. So for sure. Thank you.
Can I ask a quick question?
Matanga? Yes, Matanga says yes.
So I was also very obsessed with astrology, but I've also been very obsessed with the Krishna consciousness thing. And a lot of the Indian astrologers I listen to, they actually take examples of Prabhupada's chart or Krishna's chart, and like you were talking about the remedy, they say it's all going into yourself and remedying your own chakras, your own energy. So my bigger question was that in most of the more philosophical astrologers, they say that you should not look at your chart or other people's charts more than like at a very superficial level, just to understand your energies, but like never to look at horary chart and make predictions for mundane things, because that's actually taking you away from spirituality. Because the crux of what Krishna teaches is surrender, and you have to just chant and surrender everything to him and not worry too much about like if I buy this. I've looked into it, like actually I invested in stocks by looking at astrology and I made money, but as I went more into spirituality, I learned that your intention has to be right. It has to be to heal other people, to heal yourself. But if your intention is convoluted and it's not clear, then you will never really be blessed with the true healing power of astrology. So that's my question, that should you get so much into the details of looking at horary chart and making predictions for people on a mundane level, or should you like go deeper into spirituality and tell your audience that no, it's the answers lie within yourself, and maybe you're not getting something because the universe doesn't want you. There's a bigger picture, like, you know, you have to surrender yourself. Sometimes people are not successful in relationships because the universe wants them to give up material life and to focus on Krishna and to surrender yourself and to cleanse yourself by chanting and all that, instead of like finding solutions which will only help you in a temporary. Sorry, it was a long question, but the basic thing is sometimes I feel like it's contradicting with the path of spirituality.
Yes, and therefore we started off with that lengthy introduction. And you're right. I think you also have your answer there, that it is all about intention. And unfortunately, you may not start with the best of intentions, like you did, and maybe myself too. In the beginning, I really wanted to know more about me and what I'm supposed to do. And over time, I realized that actually, this is much better if I try and help others find out what they should be doing, or how they will be better at using their talents and abilities. So, yeah, according to your intention, you'll also find an astrologer. And that astrologer will perhaps reinforce your own lower tendencies, just because that is your agenda. So yeah, like in all undertakings, we should be very aware of our intention that we bring to it.
So if someone comes to you about like what stock advice, would you give it to them based on astrology?
No one has ever asked. You know, I throw it out there. You know, how about investing 100,000 in platinum, like with the hope that someone may come and I can get some commission and I can actually make money out of this. But yeah, no one has asked. You know.
I once asked Kavi about 4 years ago, a really big prashna that involved a lot of resources and a lot of money investing in a big tour of artists and musicians.
For your Gurudev, though.
Yeah, but it was involved, it was hundreds of thousands of dollars as well. And what was interesting was it was during a particular astrological period that was not favorable. And you told me that they should not do this, go forward with this decision. All there is debts and delays. And they were so enthusiastic about doing this tour in Mumbai, they sent a shipment of all of our costumes, all of our props. You know, it was quite a big investment. They just knew they just had to do it. And everything that you said in that prashna was true. The party that was trying to negotiate was devious. The plans that they put forward were not true and didn't come to pass. And I think the shipment even got stuck for about 3 or 4 months. You know, and I remember that was one of the most kind of obvious examples, you know, of this kind of prashna power. So in a very like logistical kind of way. You know,
Yeah. So I think that's a good way to illustrate it, similar to that example that the Srila Prabhupada gives about a scalpel, you know, a knife that can be used in the right hands. It can save a life, or it can be a weapon of extortion. So, yeah, it's all about intention. Okay, so I think we're going to...
Yes, dear devotees and guests, I'm going to close it up here because time is advancing, and I'm sure you will be open for discussions and questions afterwards, so you can chit-chat with Kavi Karnapur Prabhu. Does anybody know what Kavi means?
Poet.
Poet, yes. So Kavi Karnapur Prabhu, the poet who writes with stardust ink. And we just saw it. And now we have Premananda Kirtan Prabhu. The name already suggests Premananda Kirtan. That's the das. So we'll hear a little bit more Kirtan and then the best part of the evening program.
When is the next session, the part 2?
Saturday? 18th?
Oh, on the 18th, yeah, Saturday the 18th.
What time?
In the morning. I'm not sure. I have to check and
Yeah,
we'll
I
calculate.
think the official Bhakti school channels will.
Yeah, on the website everything is there, but yes.
Yeah, if anybody wants to keep updated with any of the events that happen here, we have a WhatsApp group, so I can take your phone number and add you into that group later, and for anybody else.
Yeah, we have flyers will be distributed, website is there, and you can also approach us to ask for more information and so forth.
To see you too. I didn't know you were